I thought I knew everything about my husband, 20 years of marriage, a pharmaceutical empire, and enough money to buy silence. But when a stranger showed up at his funeral claiming to be his son, I realized the man I buried had secrets darker than I could ever imagine. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely, stay with me. This story will shake you to your core. And please, hit that like button and subscribe, because you won't believe where this goes. My name is Victoria Hartwell, and for 2 decades, I lived what most people would call a fairy tale. My husband Robert built a pharmaceutical empire worth $800 million. We had the Manhattan penthouse, the Hampton estate, the charity galas, where we smiled for cameras and wrote checks that could change lives. I wore designer gowns and sat on museum boards. People envied us. Hell, sometimes I envied us. But there was always one shadow over our perfect life. We never had children. It was my one regret, the thing that kept me awake some nights in our 10,000 square foot home that echoed with emptiness. Whenever I brought it up, Robert would kiss my forehead and say the same thing. Victoria, my career is too demanding. Children deserve more than I could give them. We have each other. Isn't that enough? And I believed him. I swallowed my longing and convinced myself that our love was sufficient. Then, on a Tuesday in March, Robert collapsed in his office. Massive heart attack. He was 52 years old and dead before the ambulance arrived. The doctors said it was instant, no suffering. I remember thinking how typical that was of Robert, efficient even in death, but I was destroyed. 20 years of partnership, gone in a heartbeat, literally. The funeral was everything Robert would have wanted. Cathedral service, 500 guests, politicians and pharmaceutical executives filling the pews. I stood there in my black Chanel suit, shaking hands, accepting condolences, playing the role of the dignified widow. I was numb, autopilot. People kept saying I was so strong, so composed. They had no idea I was barely holding myself together. That's when security approached me during the reception. There was a young man at the gates, they said, early 20s, insistent. He was demanding to be let in, claiming he was Robert's son. I felt my blood turn to ice. My first thought was that some opportunistic fraud had read the obituary and decided to try his luck. The vultures always come out when money's involved. I had him removed immediately. I had enough to deal with without some con artist making a scene. But he didn't go away. Daniel Crane, that was his name, started calling my lawyer's office, sending letters, certified mail with official-looking documents. I ignored all of it. I was drowning in estate paperwork, board meetings, decisions about Robert's company. The last thing I needed was a scammer trying to shake me down in my grief. Robert's lawyer, Bernard Flynn, handled the will reading. $800 million, all to me. No surprises, no secret clauses, no mention of any children whatsoever. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 weeks after the funeral, Bernard called me into his office. His voice on the phone was strange, tight, nervous. When I arrived, he slid an envelope across his mahogany desk. Inside were DNA test results, certified, official, impossible to dispute. Daniel Crane was 99.9% genetically related to Robert Hartwell. The samples had been verified against Robert's medical records. This wasn't a scam. This wasn't a mistake. This young man was my husband's son. I couldn't breathe. The office walls seemed to close in. 20 years of marriage, and Robert had a son he never mentioned. Not once, not even a hint. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. Instead, I did what I always did. I put on my armor and demanded answers. I agreed to meet Daniel, but on my terms. Neutral location, public place, my lawyer present. We met at the lounge of the Four Seasons. Daniel walked in looking nervous, clutching a folder like a lifeline. And the moment I saw his face, I knew. He had Robert's eyes. The same deep-set brown eyes that had looked at me across the breakfast table for 2 decades. The same slight asymmetry in his smile. It was like seeing a ghost. He sat down and told me everything. His mother was Claire Sanderson, Robert's college girlfriend. They'd dated seriously before Robert met me, back when he was just starting to build his career. Claire got pregnant when she was 21. Robert panicked. He was ambitious, driven, terrified that a child would derail everything he was working toward. So he made Claire an offer, $50,000 to disappear, to raise the child alone and never contact him again. She was young, scared, alone. She took the money. Claire worked as a middle school teacher in upstate New York. She raised Daniel by herself on a teacher's salary, never married, never asked Robert for another dime. She kept her promise for 23 years. And then, 6 months ago, she was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. On her deathbed, she finally told Daniel the truth about who his father was. She said she couldn't die with that secret. Daniel deserved to know where he came from. I sat there listening to this story, feeling like I was drowning. Robert had a son he paid to disappear, a son he never mentioned while telling me he didn't want children, while watching me ache for a baby year after year. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt. I looked at Daniel and saw pain in those familiar eyes, pain and anger and grief, for a father he never knew and a mother he just lost. I didn't know what to say, so I did what I do best. I investigated. I hired the best private investigator money could buy, a woman named Iris Chen, who had a reputation for finding things people desperately wanted hidden. I told her to dig into every corner of Robert's life. If he had one secret this big, what else was he hiding? What Iris found broke me all over again. Robert hadn't just abandoned Daniel. He'd been watching him. There were bank records showing annual anonymous deposits into Claire's account, $10,000 every year for 23 years. Robert's private safe contained photographs, Daniel at his elementary school graduation, Daniel playing soccer at age 12, Daniel accepting an academic award in high school. Robert had even attended Daniel's high school graduation from a distance. There were photos of him in the crowd, face partially obscured by sunglasses, watching the son he'd never spoken to. But that wasn't the worst of it. Iris found evidence of a second son, Leo, 16 years old, living in Oregon with his mother, Natasha Reeves. Natasha had been a pharmaceutical sales rep who worked briefly for Robert's company. Same pattern as Claire. Pregnancy, panic, payoff, $100,000 this time, plus ongoing monthly support, another non-disclosure agreement, another secret child. Leo didn't even know Robert was his father. Natasha had told him his dad was an anonymous sperm donor. I sat in my empty penthouse, holding these files, and I couldn't stop shaking. 2 sons, 2 women, 2 decades of lies. Robert had looked me in the eye every time I mentioned wanting children, and fed me the same line about his career being too demanding. Meanwhile, he had 2 boys growing up without him. Boys he monitored from afar, like they were investments rather than human beings. Bernard finally admitted he'd known everything. Attorney-client privilege, he said. Like that made it okay. Robert had set up trusts for both boys, $5 million each, to be revealed only after his death. There were sealed letters, too, final messages from a father who'd never been a father. I demanded to read them before they were delivered. The letters were pathetic, pages of justification and self-pity. Robert wrote about being ashamed, about not knowing how to face them, about thinking money was enough. He wrote about watching them grow up from a distance and feeling proud, as if observation from afar counted as parenting, as if money could replace presence. Both letters ended the same way, with apologies that came 20 years too late, and promises of financial support from beyond the grave. I wanted to burn those letters. I wanted to scream at a dead man who couldn't hear me. But then Daniel's lawyer contacted mine. He wanted more than $5 million. He wanted a fair share of the estate. He was Robert's son, he argued. He had rights, and if we didn't negotiate, he was prepared to go public. The scandal would destroy Robert's legacy and tank the pharmaceutical company's stock. The board was already panicking. Then Natasha's lawyers joined in. Suddenly, I was facing a legal battle that could cost me half of everything Robert left behind. The empire we built together, the company I'd supported through late nights and lonely dinners while Robert worked, all of it at risk because my husband couldn't be honest about the most basic facts of his life. I was furious at Robert for lying, at Daniel and Natasha for threatening me, at Bernard for keeping secrets, at myself for being so blind. How had I not known? How had I shared a bed with this man for 20 years and never suspected he was living a completely separate life? But then something shifted. I decided to meet Leo before making any legal decisions. I flew to Oregon and sat across from a 16-year-old kid who loved chemistry and wanted to be a researcher. He was sweet, innocent, brilliant. He had Robert's analytical mind, but none of his deception. He showed me his science fair project and talked about curing diseases. When I looked at him, I didn't see a threat. I saw a boy who'd been denied a father because Robert was too much of a coward to face his own choices. And Daniel, I started actually listening to him instead of just defending myself. He didn't want to destroy Robert's legacy out of spite. He wanted to honor his mother. Claire had sacrificed everything to raise him right. She'd worked 2 jobs to send him to college. He was in medical school now, drowning in debt, trying to become the doctor his mother always believed he could be. The $5 million would change his life, but he felt he deserved more. Not because he was greedy, but because Robert owed him more than money. He owed him acknowledgement. I realized something sitting there across from these 2 young men. Robert's karma wasn't the heart attack. His karma was dying before he ever had to face his sons, before he had to look them in the eye and explain why money was easier than love, before he had to admit that his empire was built on the foundation of abandonment. He escaped accountability by dying. How convenient for him. But what would my karma be? If I fought these boys in court, if I protected my fortune at the cost of doing what was right, wouldn't I just be repeating Robert's mistakes, choosing money over people, pride over truth? I made a decision that my lawyers thought was insane. I called off the legal teams. I arranged a meeting with both Daniel and Natasha, and I made them an offer. $100 million each for Daniel and Leo. I would keep $600 million and control of the company. I would fund Daniel's medical school completely, every penny. I would set up an education trust for Leo and a larger trust that would mature when he turned 25. The only condition was that they could use the Hartwell name if they chose to, not as an obligation, but as an option. We would build something resembling a family out of the wreckage of Robert's secrets. They accepted. Not because the money was generous, though it was, but because I offered them something Robert never did. Acknowledgement, truth, a place at the table. I'm not their mother and never will be, but I could be someone who chose to do better than the man who'd hurt all of us. It's been 6 months now. Daniel visits once a month. He calls me Victoria, not Mom. But there's warmth there, respect. We have dinner, and he tells me about his rotations at the hospital. Leo comes for holidays. He's still shy around me, but he lights up when he talks about his research. I've started a scholarship fund for children of single mothers, funded in Claire's name. The pharmaceutical company is thriving under my leadership. Robert's legacy has been rebuilt, but this time it's built on truth instead of lies. Here's what I learned from all of this. Robert spent $800 million building an empire, but he couldn't spend 5 minutes building honesty. He had everything money could buy, and nothing money can't replace. His sons inherited his intelligence, but they got their integrity from their mothers, women who worked real jobs and raised good men on teacher salaries and sales commissions, while Robert wrote checks from a distance and called it fatherhood. And karma gave Robert exactly what he gave his children, nothing but money and absence. He died alone with his secrets, surrounded by wealth that couldn't save him, and achievements that meant nothing because he had no one real to share them with. Meanwhile, the sons he abandoned are better men than he ever was. Daniel is going to save lives. Leo is going to cure diseases. They're going to do more good in this world than Robert's pharmaceutical empire ever did. I could have fought them. I could have kept every penny and justified it legally, but I would have lost the only thing that matters: my humanity. The most expensive thing you can lose isn't money. It's trust. It's integrity. It's the ability to look yourself in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. Robert lost that long before he lost his life. I refuse to lose mine. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the secrets we keep and the price we pay for them, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear that truth is worth more than wealth. Subscribe, because I have more stories about lies, betrayal, and the karma that always catches up. What would you have done in my position? Would you have fought for every dollar, or would you have chosen differently? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one. And remember, the legacy you leave isn't measured in bank accounts. It's measured in the lives you touch and the truth you tell. See you in the next one.